The first warning that my life was about to change arrived on a Tuesday night in the form of one folded sheet of paper. It was lying on my pillow when I returned home from dinner with an old friend. The bedroom was dark except for the small lamp beside my bed. At first, I thought it was a grocery list or a reminder I had forgotten to write. Then I saw my name. Mum. I unfolded the paper. I've been meaning to tell you this for a long time. Stop planning your future around me in this house. I have my own responsibilities, my own family, and my own children to worry about. You need to make your own plans. I read it twice. I expected tears. They never came. Instead, I folded the paper along its original crease, placed it carefully on my nightstand, changed into my pajamas, and went to sleep. And, strangely, I slept better than I had in months. My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I am 67 years old, widowed for 9 years, and recently retired after more than 3 decades working as a school administrator. My career taught me something valuable. When people try to provoke you, you don't always have to give them the reaction they're expecting. Sometimes silence is the strongest answer. At exactly 7 the next morning, I called my attorney. By noon, my estate documents had been completely revised. My son, Nathan Hartwell, was no longer the executor of my estate. At 1:30, Nathan stormed through my front door without knocking. "Mom!" He looked furious. I was standing at the kitchen counter rinsing my coffee cup. "What happened?" I asked calmly. "My attorney just called me. She said I'm no longer the executor of your estate." I dried my hands. Then I walked into my bedroom, picked up the folded letter, and returned. I held it toward him. Nathan recognized his handwriting immediately. His expression changed. "Mum, I did exactly what you asked." I tilted my head. "You told me not to plan my future around you." "That was just a note." "Yes," I said. "And this was just a will." He stared at me. "You're taking this way too far." "No, Nathan, I think I've spent 6 years not taking things far enough." 6 years earlier, Nathan and his wife, Marissa, had been struggling financially. They were expecting their first child and living in a cramped apartment. I owned a beautiful property outside town. It had a 4-bedroom main house, a large yard, and a separate cottage where I lived. I thought I was helping my family. I renovated the cottage with my savings and gave Nathan and Marissa the main house rent-free. They only needed to handle their own utilities and everyday expenses. At first, they were grateful. Nathan hugged me. Marissa cried. They promised they would never forget what I had done. But gratitude can disappear when generosity becomes routine. The temporary arrangement slowly became permanent. Marissa began redecorating without asking. Some of my mother's furniture disappeared because she considered it outdated. Then came the babysitting. I would sometimes open my cottage door and find my grandson standing outside with a backpack. No phone call, no request, just an expectation. I tolerated it because I loved my grandson. But eventually, I realized something much more painful. They no longer viewed my generosity as kindness. They viewed it as their right. And that letter on my pillow had finally made everything clear. If Nathan wanted me to stop planning my future around him, I was going to take his advice seriously. For the first time in 6 years, I was going to plan a future that belonged entirely to me. The next morning, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and opened my laptop. Nathan had told me to stop planning my future around him. Fine. I decided to stop financing his present too. For years, I had quietly paid several expenses connected to the main house. When Nathan and Marissa first moved in, I had arranged automatic payments for the water, internet, and waste collection. It was supposed to be temporary. 6 years later, I was still paying them. I was also covering a family phone plan that included both Nathan and Marissa. Then there was the SUV. 3 years earlier, Nathan's old vehicle had broken down. I bought him a reliable SUV so he could get to work and transport his family safely. The title remained in my name. At the time, Nathan had thanked me repeatedly. Now I remembered his words. I have my own responsibilities. So, I began clicking. First, I cancelled the automatic payments connected to the main house. Future bills would belong to Nathan and Marissa. Then, I removed both of them from my mobile plan. Finally, I contacted my insurance company about the SUV. In less than 30 minutes, I had removed hundreds of dollars from my monthly expenses. When I closed the laptop, I expected guilt. Instead, I felt lighter. I had spent years confusing love with responsibility. There was a difference between helping your family and carrying them forever. That afternoon, I trimmed the roses outside my cottage and enjoyed the warm breeze. I didn't call Nathan. I didn't warn Marissa. They were adults. Adults could pay their own bills. Friday morning, Nathan came marching across the lawn. "Mom!" I looked up from my book. "Good morning. My phone doesn't work. I'm sorry to hear that." "And the Wi-Fi is gone?" "My Wi-Fi is working perfectly." He stared at me. "What?" "Your phone and internet services aren't connected to my accounts anymore." "You cancelled them?" "I removed you from my plans." "You can't just do that?" I smiled. "You told me to stop planning my life around you." His face hardened. "Are you seriously doing this because of that stupid letter?" Before I could answer, the front door of the main house opened. Marissa stepped outside wearing a silk robe. "Evelyn, what did you do to the internet?" "I stopped paying for it." Her mouth fell open. "You cut us off without warning. You've lived here for 6 years without paying rent. We have a child, and you have 2 working adults in the house." Marissa folded her arms. "You're being unbelievably petty." "No," I replied. "I'm becoming organized." She looked at Nathan, expecting him to defend her. He didn't, then she turned toward me. "If you keep acting like this, don't expect to see your grandson this weekend." There it was, the threat I had heard many times before. For years, mentioning my grandson had been the fastest way to make me surrender. But something inside me had changed. I opened my book again. "That is your decision as his mother." Marissa stared at me. She had expected tears. Instead, she watched me turn a page. She and Nathan eventually walked back toward the house. The following morning, I made another change. Marissa had developed a habit of treating my cottage like a shared storage room. She entered without knocking, borrowed food, took cleaning supplies, and once searched through my cabinets while I was away. I had tolerated it for too long. So I drove to the hardware store and bought new locks. By lunchtime, both doors had new deadbolts. That afternoon, someone tried the front handle. "Evelyn," Marissa called. I remained inside. "Open the door." I walked toward the entrance but didn't unlock it. "What do you need?" "I need to leave my son with you for an hour. I have an appointment." "I'm unavailable." Silence. Then her voice became sharper. "You're inside." "Yes." "Just open the door." "No." She stood there for several seconds. "You can't be serious." I smiled. My home isn't a drop-off centre. Her footsteps moved away. I looked at the new lock. It was only a small piece of metal. But, to me, it represented something much bigger. For the first time in 6 years, my boundaries were becoming real. And I had a feeling Nathan and Marissa were about to discover that losing free Wi-Fi was only the beginning. For the next few days, an uneasy silence settled over the property. Nathan and Marissa arranged their own phone service and internet. Delivery trucks still came to the main house, but there were fewer of them. For the first time, they were beginning to discover how expensive ordinary life could be. I didn't celebrate their discomfort. I simply continued living mine. Then, on Saturday evening, I heard music drifting across the yard. At first, I ignored it. Marissa loved entertaining. But when the laughter grew louder, I walked to my kitchen window. What I saw made me freeze. Nathan and Marissa were carrying my wrought iron patio chairs across the lawn. Then came my outdoor table. Then my 6-burner grill. I stared through the glass. They hadn't asked. They had simply decided that because my belongings were on the property, they could use them whenever they wanted. Several guests were gathered around the patio. Marissa held a glass of wine while Nathan stood beside the grill. Then, I heard her say something that made my stomach tighten. "We love having all this space." One of her friends asked a question. Marissa laughed. "That little cottage won't stay Evelyn's forever." A few people chuckled. "She's getting older. Eventually, she'll have to move somewhere smaller." Then she pointed toward my cottage. "My parents could use that place when they visit. Or we could turn it into a gym." The laughter became uncomfortable. Marissa continued. "We just need to convince her that she doesn't need all that space anymore." I stood perfectly still. It wasn't the idea of a gym that bothered me. It was the assumption. They were discussing my future as though I had already disappeared. They were making plans for my home while I was sitting less than 100 feet away. Apparently, they believed I had no power to stop them. I put on my shoes. Then I walked outside. The conversation slowly faded as people noticed me. Nathan saw me first. His shoulders tightened. "Mom." "Good evening," I said pleasantly. I smiled at the guests. "Please, don't let me interrupt." Then I walked toward the patio. Nathan's car keys were lying beside a tray of appetizers. I picked them up. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Collecting my property." His face went pale. Several guests exchanged confused looks. I slipped the keys into my pocket. Then I looked toward the grill. "Be careful with the left burners. They get extremely hot." And I walked back toward my cottage. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mention what I'd overheard. I didn't need to. The message was obvious. The furniture was mine. The grill was mine. The SUV was mine. And the land beneath their feet was mine. Sunday morning, Nathan knocked sharply on my door. I already knew why. He stood on the porch dressed for golf. "Where are the keys?" "Good morning to you too." "Mom, I'm serious." "So am I. I need the SUV." "You need transportation. That SUV belongs to me." "You've let me drive it for years." "And now I've changed my mind." His expression hardened. "You're punishing me." "No, I'm protecting myself." I explained that the SUV was no longer insured under my policy. His face changed. "You cancelled the insurance?" "Yes." "What am I supposed to do?" "You can buy a car, lease one, use public transportation, ask a friend." He stared at me. "Why are you doing this?" I looked directly at him. "Because you told me to stop planning my life around you." For the first time, he had no answer. After a long silence, he whispered, "That note wasn't supposed to mean all this." "Then you should have thought about what it meant before leaving it on my pillow." He looked down. I still loved my son. That hadn't changed, but love did not require me to surrender my dignity. "I've decided to sell the SUV," I added. His head snapped up. "You can't." "Yes, I can. Betrayal." He stopped, then corrected himself. "Marissa is furious about last night." "I imagine she is." "She says you humiliated us." I gave him a calm look. "She discussed removing me from my own home in front of her friends." Nathan became quiet. I knew then that he had heard her. Maybe he had known all along. "I think you should go," I said. He stood there for another moment before walking away. The new deadbolt clicked behind him. I watched him cross the lawn, and suddenly I realized something. Taking back the bills, phone plan, and SUV had given me control, but it hadn't given me peace. Every morning, I still looked outside and saw the main house. I saw Marissa watching from the windows. I felt the resentment growing between us. This wasn't freedom. It was simply a temporary truce. Then an idea entered my mind. Maybe the answer wasn't to change the rules. Maybe I needed to leave the entire situation behind. That afternoon, I called an old friend named Lydia Monroe. Lydia had worked in real estate for nearly 30 years. She was practical, direct, and incapable of pretending a bad situation was better than it really was. She arrived less than an hour later. After greeting me, she looked around the cottage. "So," she said, "what are you thinking?" "I want out." Her expression became serious. "Out of what?" I pointed toward the main house. "All of it." Lydia followed my gaze. She knew Nathan and Marissa lived there, but I had never told her every detail. "You're serious?" "Completely." We spent the next hour walking around the property. The main house was still beautiful despite Marissa's decorating choices. The yard was spacious, the neighborhood was desirable, and the detached cottage made the property particularly attractive. When we reached the driveway, Lydia stopped. "Evelyn, do you know what you have here?" "A headache," she laughed. "A valuable property." She explained that buyers would love the arrangement. The main house could accommodate a family, while the cottage could become an office, guest space, or private studio. "How quickly could it sell?" I asked. "If we price it correctly, very quickly." "Then list it." Lydia studied me. "What about Nathan and Marissa?" "My name is the only one on the deed." "Do they have a lease?" "No." She nodded. "Then make sure everything is handled properly. Follow the legal process for ending their occupancy." Of course. I had spent enough years making emotional decisions. I wasn't going to make another careless one. The next morning, I spoke with my attorney. We reviewed the property documents and the arrangement Nathan and Marissa had lived under for 6 years. My attorney explained the proper notice requirements and made sure every step was documented. Then I signed the listing agreement. For the first time in years, I felt excited. That evening, I opened old boxes and began sorting through photographs and keepsakes. Near the bottom of one box, I found a photograph of my late husband, George, standing beside me on the day we bought the property. We looked so young. The house had been empty then, but our minds had been full of possibilities. I held the photograph against my chest. "I should have protected this place better," I whispered. Then I corrected myself. "No, I should have protected myself better." Tuesday morning, a truck pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out carrying a large wooden post and a sign. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched him work. Within minutes, the sign was standing proudly in the front yard. "For sale." Marissa noticed it first. The front door of the main house flew open. "What is that?" she shouted. The worker continued setting up the sign. Marissa turned toward me. "Evelyn, what is going on?" I placed my cup on the table. "Good morning, Marissa." "You're selling the house?" "Yes." Nathan appeared behind her. He stared at the sign, then he looked at me. "Mom?" I waited, I said. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can." Marissa rushed across the lawn. "This is our home." "No," I replied calmly. "It's where you've been living." Her face turned red. "You're throwing us out." "I am selling my property." "You're unbelievable!" That word almost made me smile. Apparently, the only believable version of me was the woman who paid their bills, provided free housing, watched their child, and stayed silent whenever they crossed a boundary. Nathan stepped forward. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That is something you should start figuring out." "You can't expect us to find a place overnight." "I don't." I handed him the written notice. "You have the time provided under the proper legal requirements." His eyes moved across the page. "Mom, use the time wisely." Marissa grabbed the paper. "You planned this." "Yes." "You've been planning it since you found that letter." I shook my head. "No, I started planning it when I finally understood that letter." Neither of them spoke. Marissa's anger slowly disappeared. For the first time, fear appeared in her eyes. The reality had finally reached her. The property had never been theirs. The SUV had never been Nathan's. The cottage had never been Marissa's future gym. Everything they had treated as permanent had belonged to someone else. and the person who owned it had finally decided to move on. The next several weeks were filled with inspections, paperwork, and showings. I stayed out of their arguments. When Marissa complained about apartment prices, I didn't respond. When Nathan admitted they hadn't saved as much money as they should have, I didn't offer to help. Their finances were no longer my responsibility. Then, 8 days after the property went on the market, Lydia called me. "Evelyn," she said excitedly, "we have an excellent offer." I stood on my porch looking toward the house. For 6 years, I had believed that property represented security for my family. Now I understood something completely different. A home cannot give you peace when the people inside it treat your kindness like weakness. I took a deep breath. Accept the offer. And with those 3 words, the countdown truly began. The sale moved faster than I expected. Lydia had warned me that the property would attract serious buyers, especially because of the separate cottage. She was right. Within days, inspections were completed, paperwork was signed, and the closing date was set. For the first time, the main house wasn't the centre of a family argument. It was simply a property waiting for new owners. Nathan and Marissa reacted differently. Marissa became angry. Nathan became anxious. Neither reaction surprised me. One afternoon, I stepped outside to collect the mail and found Nathan sitting alone on the porch of the main house. He looked exhausted. For a moment, I didn't see the grown man who had left that note on my pillow. I saw the little boy who once ran into my arms after falling off his bicycle. I almost walked over and hugged him. Almost. Instead, I continued toward my mailbox. "Mom," he called. I stopped. "What is it?" "We found an apartment." "That's good." He gave a bitter laugh. "You don't even want to know where?" "Not unless you want to tell me." He stood and walked toward me. "It's small." "Then you'll learn how much space you actually need." His face tightened. "You really don't care anymore, do you?" The question hurt. I turned toward him. "Nathan, caring about you and rescuing you are not the same thing." He looked away. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he finally said, "I didn't think you'd actually do all of this." "I know." "Marissa says you're trying to punish us." "No." I spoke quietly. "If I wanted revenge, I would have spent every day screaming at you. I would have embarrassed you and tried to make you miserable." He looked confused. "Then what is this?" "This is me finally taking responsibility for my own life." Nathan lowered his eyes. "For 6 years, I convinced myself that helping you meant giving you whatever you needed. Somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing my help as a gift." He swallowed. "It became an expectation." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I should have said something when Marissa talked about the cottage." "Yes, you should have." "I should have stopped her from entering your house." "Yes." "I should have helped with the bills." "Yes." He gave a short laugh. "You're really not going to make this easier for me, are you?" I smiled slightly. "I already did. For 6 years." That silenced him. Then Marissa called his name from inside. Nathan looked back toward the house. The moment was over. Over the following days, moving boxes appeared everywhere. Marissa complained constantly. Doors slammed. Arguments echoed through the walls. I stayed out of it. Their new apartment was across town. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a much smaller living room than the main house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. On the 29th day, a moving truck arrived. I watched from my cottage window as Nathan carried boxes toward it. Marissa followed behind him. Neither looked happy, but for the first time in years, they were handling their own responsibilities. Around noon, Nathan walked across the lawn and knocked on my door. This time, I opened it. I just wanted to say goodbye to the place, he said. You can. He stood beside me on the porch and looked across the property. Do you remember when Dad built that swing? I followed his gaze toward the old oak tree. I remember. I fell off it. You cried for 2 hours. I was 6. You also demanded that your father cut the tree down. Nathan laughed. For a few minutes, we remembered the past. And, strangely, I felt peaceful. I wasn't losing my son. I was refusing to lose myself for him. Before returning to the moving truck, Nathan looked at me. I'm sorry about the note. I studied his face. This time, he meant it. I believe you. He hesitated. Are you ever going to forgive me? I already have. His eyes widened. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. He nodded. I understand. Perhaps for the first time, he really did. By sunset, the truck was full. Marissa climbed into the passenger seat without looking toward my cottage. Nathan stood beside the driver's door for one final moment. Then he gave me a small wave. I returned it. The truck slowly disappeared down the road. I waited until the engine could no longer be heard. Then I stepped outside. The property was completely silent. For 6 years, I had believed silence meant loneliness. Now I understood something different. Silence could also mean freedom. The sale would close soon. And I had already found a place I wanted to see. A modern condominium beside a quiet lake. It had large windows, a private balcony, and absolutely no guest cottage for anyone to claim. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Nathan needed. I wasn't thinking about what Marissa wanted. I was thinking about what Evelyn Hartwell wanted. And that felt better than I could have imagined. 3 weeks after Nathan and Marissa moved out, the sale of the property was complete. I stood inside the empty house one final time before handing over the keys. Without furniture, the rooms looked smaller, but somehow they also looked peaceful. For 6 years, I had believed this house represented security for my family. It was where Nathan had grown up. It was where George and I had celebrated birthdays, holidays, graduations, and countless ordinary Sundays. But a house can hold your memories without holding your future. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter. Thank you, I whispered. Then I walked outside. The buyers were waiting. They were a young couple with plans of their own. They loved the property because the main house offered plenty of room for their children, while the cottage could become a private studio. I wished them well. Then I handed over the keys. I didn't look back. The money from the sale gave me enough freedom to begin again comfortably. After meeting with my financial advisor and carefully organizing my savings, I purchased a modern condominium overlooking a quiet lake. The first morning there, I opened the curtains and stood beside the glass doors. The water was perfectly still. Sunlight shimmered across the surface. There was no large house outside my window, no one watching me from another kitchen, no footsteps approaching my door without permission, no one expecting me to babysit, no one expecting me to pay a bill. For the first time in years, every inch of my home belonged to me. I bought a comfortable chair for the balcony. I filled the shelves with books and placed small herb pots near the window. And then I discovered something I hadn't expected. Starting over at 67 wasn't frightening. It was liberating. Of course, Nathan didn't disappear from my life. About a month after I moved, he called. Mom, can I come over? Yes. Are you sure? I smiled. You're my son. You don't need permission to be loved. You just need permission to enter the building. He laughed. That weekend, he came alone. He brought pastries from a bakery near his apartment and placed them on my kitchen counter. You didn't have to bring anything, I told him. I know. We sat near the window and talked about ordinary things. His job, my new neighbours, my grandson's obsession with dinosaurs. Eventually, Nathan became quiet. "Mum?" "Yes?" "I've been thinking about everything." I waited. "I was angry when you changed your will. I thought you were trying to hurt me." I said nothing. "But now I understand why you did it." I looked toward the lake. "Do you?" He nodded. "I had started believing everything you gave us was automatic." His voice became softer. "The house, the car, the bills, the babysitting." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't see how much you were doing because you never complained." "That was partly my fault." He looked surprised. "You're taking responsibility for this?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I taught you that my boundaries could be ignored." He remained silent. I continued. "Every time I gave in because I was afraid of upsetting you, I made the next demand easier." Nathan slowly nodded. "I don't want to be that person anymore." "You don't have to be." His eyes became glassy. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I really am sorry." This time, I believed him. Our relationship didn't magically return to the way it had been. That wasn't the goal. Some things cannot be repaired by pretending they never broke, but they can be rebuilt differently. Nathan began visiting about once a month. Sometimes he brought my grandson. Sometimes he came alone. I welcomed him warmly, but I never gave him a key, and I never offered to rescue him financially. If he needed advice, I gave advice. If he needed emotional support, I listened. But his bills remained his bills. His home remained his responsibility. His future became his to build. As for Marissa, she never visited. According to Nathan, she still believed I had been cruel. At first, hearing that bothered me. Then one evening, I sat on my balcony and watched the sunset. I realized I no longer cared. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries often call you selfish when those boundaries finally appear. For years, I had tried to prove that I was a good mother, a generous woman, and a dependable grandmother. I didn't need to prove that anymore. That single note Nathan left on my pillow had initially felt like rejection, but in the end, it gave me the lesson I needed most. Don't build your entire future around someone who expects you to sacrifice your present for theirs. My son had told me to stop planning my life around him. So, I finally listened. I built a life around myself, and it was more beautiful than anything I had imagined. Every evening, I sit on my balcony and watch the sun disappear behind the lake. Sometimes Nathan calls. Sometimes my grandson visits. Sometimes I spend the entire day alone. And none of those things frighten me anymore, because I finally understand the difference between being alone and being free. And freedom, I discovered, has a wonderful view.